We will say no to people, even if their coding and system design is good.
This guy was a principal engineer at Amazon. He conducted thousands of interviews while he was there, and last month, I went to his studio to ask him to teach me everything he knows about interviewing in big tech. He also shared a ton of unexpected stories from his promotion to principal engineer at Amazon.
How many people are expected to be cut in Amazon typically?
What I can say is the PIP stands for Performance Improvement Plan.
And then what about the worst manager you had?
Yeah, I don't want to name names or anything, but
I know that you came from a liberal arts background. Your major going into college was actually English, right?
yeah, it was creative writing and English literature.
So can you tell us a little bit about you getting into Amazon without a CS major?
Yeah, I think just getting in as a liberal arts major may be a bit disingenuous. Both of my parents were electrical engineers, and so I've always had a computer around the house, and I used to program that computer. I still remember my first one. It was an IBM XT8088 with 640K of RAM, no hard disk, two 5.25 inch floppy disks. So that it's the floppy disk that's actually floppy, not the hard one that you probably don't even remember. And so, I've always been coding. And since a really young age, in high school, I did the computer science AP tests. My sophomore year, I did the AB test, which was in Pascal way back when. Pascal's a programming language. And my junior year, it was in C++, and I did the BC test. And so I knew about the concepts of, Big O, algorithms and data structures, how to write programs. I still remember making like a Tetris clone when I was in high school. So, the fact that I broke in without a computer science degree, if you just said the part about the English degree, like I said, it's a bit disingenuous. And so I went to school, I got a liberal arts degree. I did get a minor in math and applied math, and I took some computer science courses. When I got out of school, I was looking for work, and it was around 2005, 2006. I still remember the story. I went and talked to my writing professor in one of my senior year seminars at UW, and I was like, Professor Bosworth, what type of job should I get? I want to be a writer. And he said, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he was like, Steve, there's no job called writer. It's like, not yet. There is a job called waiter. Jesus. And so you just have to find a way to sort of support yourself while you ply your craft, right? And so just finding some sort of way to eke by while you get some experience under your belt. I wasn't really turned on by that. Right. And so I decided to revisit the skills that I had picked up in high school and before that.
I see. So, to me, then it is disingenuous to say that as if you came from zero skill, but your resume came from zero is my understanding, right? Because if I was a big tech recruiter and I was looking through stack of resumes and English major comes along, you probably would not stand out when it comes to, the job market. So what is the thing that you did that got you into Amazon?
It was through networking. So somebody that I did AP computer science with worked at Amazon. He went to University of Washington and got a proper computer science degree and was a software developer at Amazon. And so they needed some support engineers, and it was a contract position. And so I basically was like, can you get me an interview at the company? And I was not worried about a coding interview because of my prior experience, but also, I think with support engineers, they're writing scripts and maintaining systems. And so I got through on that interview, and I was a green badge contractor for about 9 months before I transitioned to full-time.
What's green badge mean? Just temp?
Yeah, it's a temp.
I see. It's an Amazon term.
Yeah, so the blue badge would be full-time.
I see.
And then green badge is A contractor, yellow is like a vendor or a
Got it.
consultant or something.
Like maybe today's environment is like a bit more intense where people want to get into big tech, and Amazon's a big name at this point. But also your resume, although it was not CS, the thing that got you in was that you knew someone and they gave you like a referral, and that made a big difference. That at least got you the interview, and then you had the skills because you had been doing CS for a while.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it, when I guide people trying to get a job, it takes two things. It takes, some amount of opportunity, and it takes some amount of study. And so you don't know when the opportunity is going to pop up. You don't know if your Uncle Daniel from church, will talk to somebody that knows about a job opening. You don't know when that's going to land. It's very unevenly distributed where these opportunities come from. But I think over time, they will come and rear their heads or make themselves available. I think the other side of it is the preparedness, right? So up-leveling yourself, gaining knowledge, gaining skills. That needs to occur. You can't just have the opportunity and then not have the skills, right? And so those two things need to marry. And so, I think back then it was much more difficult to gain the knowledge that was necessary to get into big tech. Today, you see all of these cottage industries around interview prep, getting ready for the coding interview. None of that stuff existed when I was trying to get in. And so I think it would actually be harder back then to get your foot into the door in tech from a non-traditional background than it is today. Now, I won't say that it's necessarily easy today, but at least in my mind, I think it was more difficult for me.
Yeah, I remember when we worked on that post together, you said there wasn't even the idea of like lists of leak code questions and things, and you were just collecting interview questions to prepare.
Yeah, so when I was a support engineer and they made me blue badge, so full-time employee, but I wanted to be an SDE so bad. And so all I did—
SDE for the audience is?
Software development engineer, yeah. And so I wanted to be a software developer so bad, I just cornered everybody. I just became a collector of questions. I was like, what do you ask during interviews? And I was like, don't tell me the answer. I'm going to go and figure it out. And so, just did it the old-fashioned way, just firing up an IDE, and, you don't have all these battery of test cases that get run, like, with leak code and stuff now. And so, generating your own test cases, that's a way to sort of up-level yourself. So I feel like I did it in a time where, we weren't so resource-rich.
So I imagine that probably lowered the average performance of an interviewee, and maybe because you had some extraordinary process of like collecting questions that you might have been like, very outstanding when it comes to everyone, because ultimately interview prep is a little bit competitive. You need to be better than the other people to get in.
Yes and no. I think of the distribution of demand for software developers is skewed. Especially today, I don't think there's a ton of demand for junior folks. I think there's a extraordinary amount of demand for senior and above. The reality is that seniors come from mid-level and juniors. And so I think the pipeline is a bit busted right now. I don't necessarily think of a ton of competition at the upper end. I do think that there is a lot at the lower end, but the competition doesn't exist at the interview stage. I think the competition exists at the pre-qualification and selection phase. And so if you're able to catch the attention of a recruiter, say somebody that works at the company, or you're able to go really deep in a particular area and stand out, maybe you built an app that has some amount of customers, that's where the competition is. Like, you need to stand out on the selection side. By the time you get to the interview, it's just a matter of clearing the bar there. And so the dimension of competition is not at the coding level, I don't think.
Why do you think that most interview prep advice is garbage?
I think that most interview prep is non-optimal. And so, there's a hyper focus on the coding interview. There's a hyper focus now on system design. But I think really people forget, they turn it into a test. And in some sense it is. If you can't code, then they don't want you. If you can't design a system and you're a senior, like, it's not going to work out. Like if we put you in a role, it's you're going to be that 5% that leave, right? We don't want to do that. And so the big overarching framework is the people on the other side of the table are trying to figure out whether they want to work with you, whether you're going to be a good fit for the culture. But people think about it in terms of a test. And so it's much more like a date than it is like the SAT, right? But the prep industry, the interview prep industry, it's much easier to think about it and present it as a test, right? And so I wish people would just embed this, some things like, hey, behavioral interviews have an outsized impact on whether they're going to hire you and what level you're going to come in at. So instead of, say, spending 80% of your time on coding, or maybe let's say 60% on coding and then 35% on system design, and like the 5% is like the donate to charity pie slice, like maybe it's much more like 40%, 20%, right? Because that behavioral side, I think, is really where the match is made.
Where behavioral is the 20%. Mm-hmm.
I was a bar raiser trainer, and I trained thousands of people at Amazon on how to conduct interviews, assess talent, and then level people. Before, the training was, now it's a set of videos, but it used to be live training. So I've trained many people on this. And what I used to say, and I'll say it right now, is the coding, so the functional parts of the interview, the coding interview, the system design interview, those things are the ante. Right, so they're the small blind and big blind. So I'll use a poker analogy. They're the small blind and big blind of getting into a company. And the behavioral part of the interview, that's the poker part of poker, right? That's like, do you have a good hand? Trying to beat the other hand of the other person. And so if you thought about the coding part and the system design part as necessary but not sufficient, like that's the thing that I wish people understood, right? We will say no to people that have poor behavioral answers. Poor not in the sense that they don't have the experience it needs, it's just we can recognize from far away that it's not going to be a good fit for the company. We'll say no to those people, even if their coding and system design is good.
You're saying at Amazon, it's like the functional parts, like coding, system design. That's like pass, no pass.
Yes.
But once you pass it, your leveling and the color behind how good you are is the behavioral.
Yes.
I see. Okay. So then what should people do to kind of prevent from being down leveled because their behavioral is bad?
I think that they should spend some time on what I call packaging. So if you can package your experience and sort of communicate that packaging to your interviewer, I think that's just optimal for both sides, right? So you are packaging your experience, you're communicating to them what you're all about, how you operate, what things you've done in the past. And you can make that a good story. It doesn't have to be entertaining, but it can be efficient, and you can, if you are able to effectively articulate yourself and communicate it to your interviewer, I think now we're talking about empathy. Now we're talking about things like, this is the fundamental question for interviews, is like, do I want to work with this person? That's the question that this whole song and dance for the interview process is trying to figure out. Do I want to work with this person or not? And I think spending some time on the behavioral side is about trying to help the interviewer answer that question. So you're really trying to act like yourself and not, it's not necessarily, you want to put your best foot forward. You don't want to lie, obviously. You don't want to misrepresent yourself. But I really think that, just being able to talk about who you are, what you're about, and your experience, like that's the important part. That's the missing part from all of this cottage, like interview prep that's going on the internet. That's the big thing that's missing.
Could you give me an example of packaging? Like what, maybe you could package as if you were going to sell yourself back and go back to tech.
Yeah, so just even something like, tell me about yourself, right? I think people kind of gloss over that and they kind of run on sentence their way through it. And, I think if I were to answer a question like that, it would just be like, hey, my name's Steve Huynh. I have a passion for back-end distributed systems. I really love to work on customer-facing products. I'm a sports fan. I used to work at Amazon Tickets and Prime Video Sports. And, I really love like building teams and really, taking an organization's engineering culture and up-leveling it at that level. Like those are some of my passions, right? Like, I didn't prep for that. That was kind of an interview off the cuff. But, hopefully you got a sense of, who I am and what I'm about and the level that I operate. One thing that I like to say is that the stories you tell, they sort of betray your level. The way that you communicate with people, they betray your level, right? And so if you have stories that are SDE1 stories, right, entry-level stories, but you're trying to get a senior role, that incongruity is the thing that's going to lead to the down-leveling.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like the last thing that you said there was up-leveling teams. You're almost speaking to like a staff or higher rubric where, it's not like you said, oh, I like to clean up the code or
yeah, I love refactoring code. It's like I do.
Yeah.
But that's not how I'm going to describe myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I trying to turn this into a video of some sort, but I want to do a thing where I just talk with somebody for 5 minutes and I try to figure out whether they're senior or mid or staff or whatever they are.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Like a blind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you don't know and you just.
Yeah. And maybe I'm overconfident, but I feel like if I talk to a junior entry-level person, I would know that they're a junior entry-level person. They just the way that they carry themselves, the things that they talk about, now maybe on the, if they're a strong senior engineer, are they going to be able to pass as a principal? Yeah, there's some places where I might struggle, but I think I'm really calibrated in terms of level.
So that's for the interview stage. What about before you get the interview? Right now, it's a really competitive job market. Do you have any advice for people to stand out?
You have to be an outlier in some regard. And so being an outlier may mean, oh, I have a contact that can give me a referral to a big tech company. I think that if you cold DM'd some folks on a team that had an opening, and it was, you didn't like spam them. It didn't look like an auto DM sort of thing or a script. You didn't sound like AI, and you were just like, hey, my name's Ryan. I noticed you work on this team and you have some openings. Like, can you tell me what it's like on your team? Like, what are the sort of things that you do on a day-to-day basis? And then also, I'm a university student. I'm about to graduate in 3 months. Like, how can I position myself optimally in order to get this job? I ran a poll on my Discord, and 90% of people said that if somebody did that and they were genuine about it, that they would interact with them and that they would actually extend a referral if they asked, right? And so that's an easy way to be an outlier in networking. I think about a lot, there's this networking stuff where it's just like, hey, strengthen your networking, go up and talk to people. There's this, and it's American style too. So it's like, everybody thinks it's fake and surface level, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? Like, you should do those things, but like, really, like, networking is about making some sort of connection, right? And so if you're able to connect with people, they're in a spot to help you. If you can provide value to them, right? I think that's one way to be an outlier. I think if you're new and you're willing to pick up skills, hey, what's the skill that I should pick up so that I'm much more attractive to to big tech or to getting a job. I think that most people should go deep instead of going broad. They'll be like, oh, I'm doing a React tutorial, then I'm gonna learn Rust, and then there's a machine learning Python thing with, PyTorch, and they go breadth, and there's no cohesion there. It's like, mobile app development and machine learning. Yeah, you can make them sort of, connect to each other, but in some sense it's contrived, and there's just so much to learn. And so I give the general guidance. It's just like, okay, well, what's the thing that interests you in a framework or a language that you already know? And like, how deep can you go in a particular, in a thing that you already have some familiarity with?
2025, is there a top programming language that you'd recommend for someone to go deep in?
The cheeky answer is English is the top programming language in 2025.
What do you mean by that?
We had talked about it a little bit before, but the ability to communicate yourself, the ability to package your experience and tell a good story, I think that's the thing that's the high leverage activity. In terms of languages, dude, I've been programming. I've done assembly in BASIC and Pascal and C and C++. Like I learned C in 1990, right? Like languages they come and they go. Like I consider myself a Perl expert. Like that, that's no longer useful, right? And so, like the language itself, I think, in a sense, is immaterial. I think this is where I think your personal curiosity. Like it's totally fine to pick up something that you have an affinity towards. I think it's also totally fine to be like, hey, look at all of these jobs in Java. I don't think Java is going away, or at least JVM-based languages. And so I think it's totally okay to be like, well, I'm going to become an expert in Java. That's not very sexy right now, but that's a totally fine reason. So however you get there, my advice is just go deep, right? People will be like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to do a Java tutorial. And then I think an example of going deep is just being like, oh, what's going on in this virtual machine? What are virtual machines, right? What does it mean to tune a garbage collector? We can get into a debate about whether you're going to shoot yourself in the foot with, trying to tweak your Java garbage collection. But if you are willing to pop the hood on that and then sort of like take a look at what's going on in there, that's a sort of thing that nobody can stop you. Right? Like you can just try to go deep. Steve said to go deep, so I'm going as deep as I can until you get to the ones and the zeros that are flowing through on that bus, right? Like that is the thing that is rare.
Last thing on this topic of breaking in. Recently, Zuck, he had this quote. He said on an interview that the capabilities of AI in this year will be able to produce mid-level engineer code already. Do you think that junior engineers are screwed then because of that?
I think it's super interesting. Maybe you should tell me, you're the one that works at Meta, right? But I'll say this. Folks at the CEO level, they're very high performing. Their job is to look into the future. But they tend to make predictions that they're not exaggerated, but they tend to make things like the timeline for which things happen, they tend to undershoot that. And then they tend to overshoot in ability. But the idea is that the vision exists and you work towards it. The fact that he says he equivocates, or at least he's hedging, he's saying mid-level engineers later this year. If that was actually already there, he would have said senior staff level engineers or 10x engineers by tomorrow.
Right.
The fact that he's pushing that out makes me think that the actual the rollout of a mid-level AI bot within Meta is a little further away, because his job is to move the goalposts just a little further than where we're at. And so I have a little bit of doubt there. Now, if you want to talk about AI taking over some tasks, yes, absolutely, they should. I think when I was coming up as a mid and senior, code generation. Look at these annotations. We can put Lombok in our code. You don't have to write getters and setters. there was, I have a lot of familiarity with Java. Java is a very verbose language. Oh, look, the IDE can help me refactor some code. The IDE can write some boilerplate for me. Yes, absolutely, we should be leveraging tools to make us more efficient. But at this point, I think of AI help as an amplifier. If you just go through the different levels, if you're a non-coder, I think that you can go from 0 to 1 very easily, right? So we're getting to the point with products like Replit where a non-coder could conceivably become a product manager and build like a mobile app, right? Soup to nuts from beginning to end. But I have my doubts that if the app doesn't work exactly the way that it's intended, or they're like, hey, scale this thing to meta scale. Like, I don't think an AI is going to be able to do that. So I think very comfortably we'll be able to go from 0 to 1, but I don't think that it will go from like 1 to many. I think a 1x engineer is going to definitely turn into a 10x engineer today with the help of AI. But do I see a 0 to 10x engineer jump like later this year? I don't see it.
Okay, so then I guess moving into you being at Amazon, you went into Amazon, you converted to an SDE, and then you climbed all the way to principal at Amazon, which I know that last jump is also very notoriously difficult. So you went from SDE1 to SDE2, SDE3, and then principal. Could you walk me through the high level? Maybe just tell me, what was the main thing that made the difference at each level, and just like a very concise
Sure.
high level. Yeah.
Yeah, I was able to get to from support engineer SDE1, 2, and 3 around 3.5 years, something like that. At SDE1, I think the real focus is on some amount of independence. So just understanding where you fit inside of the software development lifecycle, getting to the point where you can take tasks and see them all the way through. So you've gained a little bit of trust there, and you don't have to be handheld. I think that's the critical piece for junior level or SDE1. I think I just want to add a caveat there, which is that doesn't mean you know everything, and that doesn't mean that you don't ask questions. It's just that you're much more comfortable asking a question if you're stuck. You're much more comfortable surfacing an issue. There's some folks that have this idea that at SDE1 or at any level that you are completely self-contained. So self-contained is not the same thing as being independent.
Well, one of the common words I hear for that first promo is like doing things independently without guidance. Some people interpret that as I'm not going to ask for help and I got to do it all myself, which is obviously not right. But you need to know how to unblock yourself. So it makes sense.
And it's also insidious in the sense that it's not just not right so that it will hold you back for longer, but it actually turns into a performance issue if you're hiding the fact that you're not able to perform or you don't know anything. If you're hiding progress because you're unsure about yourself and you sort of beat yourself up that you should know this thing, and suppose you have a task and it should take 2 weeks, and then you're like, hey, everything's on track, and then the Thursday before, you're like, I've been blocked this whole time. That's a performance issue, right? And so, there's a difference between, it's just going to take you longer to get there, to something that's actually detrimental to get to the next level. I think for SDE2, the word that pops into my head the most is ownership. And so, you are an active participant in the software development lifecycle. You're much more of a steward of, say, your team's code base. And I just sort of think about it like, hey, you're littering. Don't litter here. And then maybe picking up some of the trash. That trash being tech debt, not actual trash. In the code, being able to get, you're able to leverage this independence and to start to make a contribution to the team's code base that's a little bit larger, right? So basically every step up with SDE is kind of an argument that you deserve more scope. And so the scope of an SDE2 or mid-level engineer is at the team level, right? You understand your team's code base, you understand its weaknesses, its strengths. You can start to, make suggestions about where it's going to be. At Amazon, we have an operational culture. And so, you're on call, you know how things break, you might have some ideas about how to fix some of these things. And so it's a very, meat and potatoes sort of role. And,
this is what you need to go from 2 to 3.
Yeah, I'm just talking about 2.
Oh, this is table stakes for 2.
I think it's expectations for, at least this is my conception of it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there's an eternal debate at Amazon about whether the SDE2 or mid-level role is a terminal position or not. Mm-hmm. Can you retire as an SDE2? The level granularity at Amazon is such that I think SDE2 is a very wide band. So I think at the upper levels of SDE2, a lot of those folks are senior engineers at other companies, even within big tech, not just, they're a senior engineer at a smaller company or a startup. I think you're pretty strong as an SDE2 at Amazon just because the granularity for levels at Amazon is so terrible. And so I tend to bias towards actually at SDE2, that could be a terminal level, right? Now, I don't advise that people think of it as a terminal level, but it's just a reflection of how much scope I think an SDE2 at Amazon can actually deliver against.
So there isn't an up and out policy. Like if you were a manager at Amazon and you had someone that says, "Hey, I want to just stay at SDE2," is that okay, or would they get fired in Amazon's culture eventually?
So, and it might have changed. It's been close to a year since I've been gone. So I say we a lot, as though I still work there. I'm still trying to train myself. I don't work at Amazon.
Yeah.
So it's definitely up and out at SDE1.
Yep.
And so if you've been at SDE1 for more than 2 years, it's kind of like this is
there
something
a
needs to go.
formal 24 months and then they start managing out, or it's a feel thing?
I believe it's a progressively stronger guidance the longer that you've been there, but it's not a 36 months and then you're out sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think for SDE2, it's a much more interesting conversation. I think that will depend on where the upper management, for that particular individual, where they land on whether SDE2 is a terminal level or not. Mm-hmm. And so if you happen to get a manager that's basically like, no, you've been there for 10 years, you should be a 3. If you happen to get that person, then I think it might be bad news for you.
And with the recent news about Meta, a lot of people are likening, or they're worried that Meta would turn into Amazon, because Amazon's famous for a culture of intense performance and cutting people who aren't making it. From your time at Amazon, I'm kind of curious. Maybe you can give us the juicy details, like how many people are expected to be cut in Amazon typically? Like, because you were there for so many years, is it some percentage per year, or is it up to the manager's discretion? How does that work?
What I can say, so I won't give an exact number. Yeah. What I can say is that guidance. Suppose it was 5 or 6%, for an organization. That number used to be a recommendation. It would be kind of a soft one. Hey, we need to manage out X% of folks over the course of a year. I think in the past couple of years, that has turned into a much more, it's turned from guidance to much more of a mandate. Yeah. I think coupled with the fact that up until recently, they weren't doing backfills for folks. There was this sort of like, hey, keep on running because this thing's chasing you, right, from the back.
Yeah.
I don't think that was necessarily healthy.
Yeah.
And, if I were to be quite honest, I consider myself a high performer. And so if you're a high performer, you don't have to think about that stuff. And, as much as I'd like to be empathetic about it, and, I've been around some of these decisions and meetings and stuff like that, if you're down, it's hard for me to speak about what it's actually like to feel like your job may be at stake, right? And so, I think a lot of what I would tell you is just kind of cold and numbers based. But there are real people here, right? If getting fired from a job is, that's a highly emotional, psychological thing, right? So I just want to make sure that I bring that up. Maybe I'll say this, and this is sort of how I guided other folks and other managers when they're asking me, hey, how do I think about this? The way to think about it is 5%, suppose that was the number, right? So that's 1 in 20 people, right? And so just take a population of 20 people, and I think there's a distribution there. And the people on the left-hand side of that distribution, in regular years where there are backfills, I think that they're not having a good time with Amazon's culture, right? They're not thriving, almost by definition, right? We're just going to say, hey, everything on the left-hand side is people aren't having a great time. And so I think it's almost a relief that there's a way to sort of like leave a situation like that. What's the alternative? They stay. And somebody that's not having a great time in Amazon's culture, which, it doesn't have a great reputation. Part of me is like, oh, that's kind of nice that, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, right? That we would move them out. Now, without backfills, that's where I start to get a little uncomfortable, because in basically any other year that they would be at Amazon, they would be totally fine. And I think even people, that are sort of left shifted, but in that main part of the distribution, I think they're great. And so that's where I start to go like, this is not something that I really agree with.
You're saying because it starts to cannibalize people they're doing good, but now we're forced to stack rank people that were good.
So suppose you had a 6% amount of folks that were let go, and that was a hard thing. And so you did all of the very tough work to identify those folks and have them move out. And now you need to do 6% of those folks that remain. And then you need to do 6% of those folks that remain. And so it's not 18%, I can't do that math. Mm-hmm. But now we're starting to talk about people that are very close to the mid point. They're operating at a high level. And in any other year, they'd be totally fine. But now they're not. And so, I have colleagues that were let go recently, and it just kind of blows my mind that they would be let go. And so I think the most amount of impact will come from folks that say middle management, where, okay, well, there's 4 middle managers within the sub-org right here. The bottom 6%, 6% doesn't even make sense when you're talking about 4 people or 8 people, right? And so I was very surprised by some of the people that were let go recently.
So you said when in the past, because I guess as a principal engineer, once you get higher up, you were privy to some of the conversations where people are being discussed if they're getting managed out. What happens in those conversations? How does a high-level IC like you participate?
Yeah, you start getting pulled in when you're a senior engineer, and you definitely get pulled in when you're L7 or above. Those meetings are terrible, right? They're like 3 days long, and you're locked up in a room, and you're just sitting there talking about people, and you start to lose the humanity. You just start to think of them in terms of, the measurables, right? And the feedback from other folks. I won't go into the specific process, but what I will say is it's not a linear algorithm. I think in a perfect world, you would just go through everybody in the org, and then you would have equal amount of time to talk about them and their strengths and their weaknesses. Typically, you just talk about the edges. And that's not a reflection of, the people that are making the decisions and whether that's poor or not. It's the math. There are just too many people. And so the conversation tends to go to either side. And it's not my favorite time of year.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds intense, especially if they cut out some low performers, and then the next iteration is like people where you objectively look at them and go, oh, they're solid, but we need to fork over some more people.
Now, if you want to talk about Meta, I think Meta is on a hiring spree, if I'm not mistaken. I think, you know, if your fearless leader is saying, hey, low performers are leaving, and it's, say, at a 5% number, I think that's the number that's been floated around. I just have a sense that those folks are probably not having a good time at Meta right now, right? Is that everybody? No. But I would say the vast majority of folks there, if you're talking about 1 in 20 people, 20 random people at Meta, there's probably somebody that's struggling, especially when you start multiplying that out across a large population. So because the inflow is much larger than the outflow, I wouldn't be too worried.
Sounds like across big tech, there's this increased intensity, and historically, Amazon has been the one that's always had this level of increased intensity, or at least this process of like, let's manage out the low performers quickly, and let's just factor that into our processes. Given that you've been in a lot of those performance conversations, do you have any advice for the people who are on the border where, you know, if this is how we're going to be operating in the future, people who are kind of just meeting expectations, what is the things that protects you in those conversations that they could do for this coming year to be safe?
I think it's just that. If you meet expectations, if you solidly meet expectations, if everybody across the organization met expectations, I don't think you have a 5% stack ranking, like removing folks from the system, right? And so, you know, I don't think that people that are, and I bristle a bit at the low performer label. I just again, I think of it as like the culture is not working out. There is a mismatch between me and the ambient environment at any particular company. I don't think it's a low performer. You know how hard it is to get an offer at Meta? Like, you are not a low performer.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be driven. There is a song and dance that you need to perform under pressure in front of somebody. Like, you go and take a leak code hard, and you have to go look at some, you have to code it in front of some SDE that's like got a bad expression on their face. Like, you are more than qualified. You're smart as hell, and now you're working at a company, and maybe you thought it was something different than what it actually was. What I would say is, I don't think these low performers, these so-called low performers, they should try to become high performers, right? I think by focusing on trying to be a high performer or focusing on trying to get to the next level, there's usually a reason why you're labeled that way. And so try to figure out what is that dimension that you're being judged and measured against that's holding you back from meeting expectations. So I think you need to crawl before you walk, before you run. What is that thing that they're judging you on? And then I think you should be real with your manager. And you should say, hey, I just wanted to check in. Am I meeting expectations? And if I'm not, then like let's do a preemptive plan, right? So PIP stands for Performance Improvement Plan. Can you do a pre-PIP? Can you proactively put together a plan to get you to a spot where you're going to be safe? That's what I would recommend. Just be proactive about growth to get back to the median.
Asking your manager for a proactive PIP is...
I would maybe not use those words.
That's hilarious. Okay, so it sounds like, I mean, obviously meet expectations, work with your manager.
Well, I don't think it's obvious. I actually, if you took a survey of software developers and you asked them, have you used these words with your manager? Suppose you're my manager.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, I just started here at Meta. I just wanted to get a sense of what your expectations of me. What are those, right? Have you explicitly asked about expectations with your manager? I think like 25% of people have actually done that. I think most people are trying to guess at what those expectations are. And so I think that would be my first bit of advice, is just like straight up ask what expectations are, and then ask if you're meeting them or not.
Right.
That would go so far.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think most people, I don't know if it's being shy or what, but I feel like most ICs don't directly talk to their manager and say, I want this, or, how do I meet expectations? How do I get promoted? Kind of just do the work and do it well and hope that things go well.
Well, obviously there's going to be an answer.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, Ryan, what's your expectation of me? And am I meeting it? It's like, no, Steve, you are not meeting expectations, and it's starting to become a problem. Even that is a better situation than not knowing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. And so there's a mutual friend of ours, Rahul Pandey from Taro.
Yeah.
I stole this saying from him, and I don't know if he stole it from somebody else that worked at Meta, but it's basically like bad news that's delivered early is just news. Right. Bad
sense.
News that's delivered late is terrible news.
Yeah.
So so if you are asking about expectations and it's early in your career, it's early in cycle, and they're like, hey, this is a problem. Well, now you've surfaced the issue, and you have a fighting chance of actually addressing it. If you are like, hey, what's up with my expectations? Oh, it's really bad. And it's December, right? So the months preceding performance review,
It's over.
You're not in a good spot.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just encourage people to try to find as much bad news as early as possible.
For your principal promo, I think a lot of it comes down to having the opportunity and then delivering. But it's interesting to dig into how you got the opportunity to even deliver on principal scope. So kind of curious, can you tell the story about how you got that?
So I was reorged back into Prime Video. And so the previous team to that was a team that I cared deeply about. It was called Amazon Tickets. We sold tickets like Ticketmaster, built a bunch of really awesome tech, filed a ton of patents. I love music. I love going to live shows. And so I was like, oh, this is great. They spun that business down, and they reorged that whole team into Prime Video. And basically the 30 or 40 devs that were in that organization, they kind of just scattered into the wind, right? And I had a bad taste in my mouth, and so I didn't want to talk to any other teams, so I was basically like, okay, well, what do I have here? What they had was a team that was focused on delivering live sports on the Prime Video platform. And I'm a big sports fan as well. And so I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And then I looked around and I was like, oh, there's a bunch of principal engineers here. Okay, so cool. I can learn about what's going on there. And there was this really big need that was there, just the catalog work. And I just made a decision about whether I wanted to pick it up or not, right? And I decided to. It was just in reality much larger than any other project that I had ever done. I wouldn't say it landed on my lap. It was a combination of staying and then sort of saying, okay, well, if I stay, I need to do this.
I see. So it's some scope that principal engineers were aware of, needed to be done, was particularly difficult. It was just sitting there for someone to take it on.
Yeah.
You took the initiative, say, all right, I'm going to take it and stay on this team, and then you delivered on it.
Yeah, it's, the way that the principals were organized back then, it's changed now, but essentially the principals were assigned to different areas, say like playback or clients or catalog or wherever they were. And the work that needs to be done was in the gaps between those orgs. So it had to be an end-to-end solution. And so even though the main thrust of the work was in these sort of centralized services, and so that's why, none of the other principals had done it, because they were doing all of this other stuff that was necessary for us to deliver.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense too, because I imagine also if you delivered on that, so each principal to each, central vertical, and you're delivering some glue work, if you did that job really well, not only is the scope huge, but also these principal engineers are you know, they're going to have context on your work and speak to your packet and be champions for you. So I'm sure that was helpful too. A lot of people, they say getting to principal at Amazon is so difficult. People don't even recommend doing it. You know, there's all this job hop advice. So what is the thing that usually blocks people from going from senior to principal at Amazon?
There's a lot of reasons. I think, just to back up a little bit, I am of the impression that Amazon just skipped a level. So they should just insert a staff level. They could do that right now. Basically, they would say, okay, well, everybody that's principal, we'll call you principals, shove staff in there, and then just say, hey, for the really high performing SDE3s, we're just going to move you there preemptively. And that would be so great. But I think the big problem is that you're essentially jumping 2 levels for that particular promotion. And so the big thing that's holding them back is that you need to jump 2 levels, right? So there's basically double the amount of criteria to get to that next level. And I think it's kind of impossible to exhibit all of the moving to criteria for principal in a year. So if you think you're ready, hey, I'm a senior engineer, I've been doing really well, I'm going to make a big push. I think it's because the job is so different, because now you're influencing multiple teams. It's very difficult to find the opportunity and then also be able to perform at a level where people would consider you for the next level, 12, 18 months. And so what ends up happening for, the failure mode that I see the most is they think they're ready. They will make a push. They will get a rejection. And they will get some amount of feedback. And then what they'll do is they'll just go back to their strengths, and then they'll continue to work on they might address 1 or 2 of these pieces of feedback, but it just takes so long to close one of these cycles. And so a lot of people give up. I know so many folks that, went to Meta and they're thriving, or they went to Google, absolutely thriving right now. Senior staff, E8, principal at Google, which is, 2 levels past staff and 1 level above senior staff. They're doing awesome. They just couldn't make that jump, right, from SDE3 to principal. And so it turns into this thing where I think there's this 2-year sliding window of where you kind of have to pack in basically a new job. You have to basically be doing 2 jobs, because there's an anti-pattern where you just stop doing all of the things that you need to do for SDE3, and you just focus on the principal level stuff. And then performance review time comes around, and then they're like, you're actually low performance at SDE3, even though you're a high performer doing principal level things.
How's that possible? What are those 2 jobs and how are they so different?
Well, the reason it's possible is because performance and promotion are decoupled. 2 different processes.
What's the performance process at Amazon?
Performance process is, yearly, and then, every 6 months there's a smaller version of that. And then the promotion process depends on the level, so it could be quarterly or it could be every 6 months. So they might line up generally, but the idea is that there's not a dependency on one with the other. And so if you're trying to make a big push for promotion and you're doing all this principal stuff, and then, then it's, so here's a big example. Senior engineers need to code, right? That's a very important thing that they do. And principals are also expected to code, but not as large of a contribution generally. Direct contribution is not rare, but that needs to be balanced with their other obligations. So they might be a sponsor of a project, or they might be acting as a backstop, or they might be acting as a catalyst or an evangelist for a particular initiative. And so, those roles, they are pan-team, right? So it's cross-functional teams. There might be product teams. There might be 5 dev teams. These dev teams may be spanning multiple organizations. You might act like a TPM. I was accused of that in one of my promotion assessments. It's kind of hard to figure out whether Steve's an SDE or a TPM. kind of took offense to that. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? And one of them came back, it's like, hey, you need to code more. And I'm like, I have checked in so many lines of code. And so, okay, well, there's some sporadic, 6 months where I didn't code a lot. And it's like, I didn't get any credit for time served.
I see. Okay, so they looked at the code delivered in those 6 months when you're going for principal. They looked at it, not a lot of code. And so they said, okay, we're blocking you because you're not doing the senior job.
Yeah.
But principal was good because you were doing all the cross-functional.
Yeah, and so then it got kicked. So then it's like, okay, well, now I'll go code. Right, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's been a long time since he's been on call. He's not in the day-to-day operations for an individual team." It's like I've been, I was there for 18 years. I have been on call longer than time on call longer than most people's careers at Amazon by far. I've probably been on call like 4 years contiguously.
Yeah.
And so you get feedback like that, and you're just like this. Like I'm battling the process now, right? And so to be quite honest, I was promoted in 2020, and I thought I was ready at 2016. So, I was promoted to senior in 2012. So it took 8 years to get there. I thought I was there in 2016. And
4 years, and you went for promo every year, and they gave you like this TPM feedback or other.
Yeah, there were a number of obstacles, but they changed the process 3 times during that 4-year span. I just to be honest, I probably hadn't generated enough evidence that I was operating at that level. That's not to say that I didn't have the ability, but you need to generate this tangible evidence that goes into your packet. So I wasn't quite there yet. You need the support of your manager, and so there was a number of reasons why I wasn't able to get there. But a lot of it was just battling the process itself. I don't think I necessarily up-leveled myself. I think I just became an expert in the process of getting promoted.
And so what did you learn from becoming an expert of that promo process for senior to?
Yeah, I think about it and like, is that a useful skill? Yeah, I think so. I think it's useful for people that are in Amazon. I learned a couple of things. So the big ones are, don't wait to start. I think a lot of people postpone themselves. And so they're like, oh, well, after this big project lands, that's when I'll get my packet together. But the project landing may not be the thing that you would be rejected for. And so I'm a big proponent of being kind of impatient and putting your packet in early and then getting that actual feedback about where the gaps are. So that's one failure pattern. I think the other is, you do get some amount of credit for strengths in your promo packet. And so suppose your strengths are, he's a great communicator, very data-driven. He does a lot of, he's a strength. There's a strength with interviewing, great coder. Cool. Feedback, oh, well, he's not scaling through others. He could be a better mentor. He doesn't communicate upward very well to directors or VPs. So let's work on that. You don't really have to put so much emphasis on the strengths. Just make sure that they don't regress and turn into problems. But I think you can just focus on the delta because that's what the promo panel is going to do. When we try to make the promo packet sticky to a particular set of individuals. And so it's like, okay, well, Ryan, rejected. You get the big red stamper thing on a piece of paper. And, 6 months later, it's like, oh, Ryan, he's not promoted yet? Okay, let's dig in. Again, with humans, just like the talent review process, you're going to look at the delta, you're going to look at the outliers, right? And so you're going to be like, okay, well, what changed, right? And just let's look at the evidence that's there. And so if you're able to really focus in on the areas for growth, the places where there aren't as many data points, then I think you'll be pretty successful.
When you get that packet back, you're saying there's the strengths and then there's things that blocked it. And you're saying strengths, they're good. You don't need to worry about those. Just focus on the weaknesses and closing those gaps.
I would just say prioritize the weaknesses and gaps. And I think about it like you're in a kitchen with a lot of pots and pans everywhere. It's like your strengths, you can put that on the back burner. Mm-hmm. right? But this risotto, like you're gonna sit here and make sure that the risotto is good, right? It's like you're adding broth. You just can't. You have to make sure that you got that right.
And so you said you were at Amazon for 18 years. Amazon's culture is very specific. They have the leadership principles. It's its own, culture. What's your favorite parts of Amazon culture? And then we'll also talk about the worst parts too.
The worst parts in it. I think there's some amount of Stockholm syndrome for me being there for so long. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I still say we, even though it's been a while since I worked
What's your favorite Kool-Aid then?
Well, the big thing is customer obsession.
Oh yeah.
I think, especially when Bezos was there, nobody ever gave lip service to the customer experience. That was the highest priority. From interns to VPs, you were always going to be doing the right thing if you had the customer in mind. Absolutely, 100%. And I think that's a great North Star. And so, I think if you chase profits or you focus on competitors or, there's a lot of other trappings that are there, you might optimize for the wrong thing, right? If you optimize for short-term next quarter profits, it's going to bite you in the long run. If you optimize for, if you're just sort of chasing, that's another problem, right? And so if you actually work backward from the customer, Jeff Bezos has that saying, they're like, hey, long-term profits and customers, those are the same thing. There's no difference there. I think that's wonderful. Another thing that I think is a superpower for Amazon is their writing culture. I think the ability to write a 6-page doc, that was accelerated by the fact that I have a writing degree. And so I didn't realize that I had the precursor to a superpower. When I joined, I was worried about like learning Java, right? Or learning how to deploy to prod. Man, I wish people would have a college class to figure out how to like send an email or to be clear about like the work that's in front of them. And so what comes with a wonderful writing culture is a wonderful reading culture. Like we literally will spend the first 30 minutes of a meeting reading the document. And then we will have a discussion afterwards. This never works. It's like, oh, I sent you the document. So after you've read the document, we're all going to get in there. No, nobody does that, right? Like they should. It's like a best intention sort of thing, right? But the fact that you're forced to read it at the same time and everybody's just sort of fast forwarded to the same place and then you can have a discussion, like that's actually super powerful.
So if someone was onboarding to Amazon, they really want to make sure they hit the ground running and plug into the culture, would you say that's one of the most important things?
Yeah, if they are curious about how we know we're doing right by the customer, yeah, I think that's if you have a curiosity about that, you will do really well. The writing culture, I think that's just the medium by which we express our ideas. That's learnable. That's something that I wouldn't necessarily focus on before you joined.
You said you're drinking the Kool-Aid, but there's got to be something that you don't like about Amazon culture. What would be the number one thing?
I
know mine.
What's that?
I remember this was like a joke among my friends and I at Amazon. There's the leadership principles, right? And there's a list of 11 or 12 things that everyone's kind of basing everything off of. And there's one there that was just like the recurring inside joke among our friend group, which was frugality. So basically anytime something was crappy or cheap or whatever, we would just say, oh, it's frugality. So, no free food, no, there was some other things too, like our hardware wasn't particularly good.
Yeah, I think free food, that's a perk. If a company doesn't provide you food, like that doesn't mean it's a bad company. So it's great on the upside, but I don't think it says very much on the other side. I do think, frugality. We have a term called being frupid, where you are so frugal that it's kind of stupid. I had to beg, borrow, and plead for hardware, right? Like I'm trying to get trying to get a MacBook Pro with like some RAM so that it doesn't like the fan doesn't overheat when I'm running, like building my code. It's like, if you're going to hire, tens of thousands of software developers, you won't like get them a computer that works. Now, I'm not saying like I need the top of the line thing. I just need a computer. I'm a software developer. Give me a computer that works. When intern season would come and then the interns would leave and then the vultures would come to try to steal the monitors. Right. And so it's just like, it just reminds me of like Oliver Twist, like, it's like more, please. It's like, you just want a little bit more gruel.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to dig into, and I guess this is switching to another topic, is in your time at Amazon, you had 17 managers over 18 years. So you've seen a lot when it comes to managers. What was it that made your best manager the best manager out of 17?
I think I had more than 17 managers, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was in the 20s last time I checked.
Jeez.
I took a screenshot of my phone tool. I think a lot about this. Sometimes people would complain about a micromanager, but there's a class of folks that kind of like a micromanager. Like they kind of need to be led. They kind of need things broken down for them. I do think that a lot of what makes a good manager is personal. The ones that I resonated with, they tended to be principles based, right? So not just the leadership principle stuff, but like the way that they operated. They sort of reasoned through. You think of these principles as axioms, and so you fix certain things, and those things have implications. And so the best managers, I think, they fixed customer obsession. They fixed things that I value, like sort of thinking ahead in the future. So they were maybe willing to entertain some stuff that in the short term, like a hack, but it was always within the context of like, what should we do? What's the right thing to do in the future? Okay, so like let's make a trade-off for that. Instead of, maybe some managers that I didn't like are folks that are maybe too delivery oriented, right? So it's just a constant death march. It's about delivery. It's about near-term delivery. So folks that kind of thought it a little bit ahead in the future and were maybe not so constrained by what we had in front of us.
I see. And then what about the worst manager you had out of 20-something managers?
Yeah, I don't want to name names or anything, but sometimes I think about how did we get here? Right? And so like we live in a moment right now, and so I'm talking to you, and so I can see it, a year ago he was here, and a year before that he was here, and I can kind of see the progression of how you get from, maybe a university student at UCLA to where you are right now. Like that progression makes sense. I think some people that I worked with, you're like, how did you get here? Like it's sort of like the Silicon Valley thing. I forget the name of the guy that
Big Head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It had to have been some sort of big head scenario where, he fell up, right? Luck happened and everything just sort of landed in their lap. So, I think the worst managers I had would be a combination of like not my style, right? So again, micromanager to one person is a really caring and engaged manager to another person. And then just a little bit of like WTF, like, how did you get here? I thought that the whole performance and promotion process and the hiring process was supposed to filter a certain set of folks out. And here we are.
At the end of each interview, I like to go over just general reflections of people, kind of looking over the career. What are the things that you learned and various other things. One thing that I'm curious about, because you were at Amazon for 18 years, and in this industry, that is extraordinary. People already call me fossil for being at Meta for greater than 4 or 5 years. So, what kept you at Amazon so long?
I think that, we had talked about the number of managers that I had reported to. I had many mini careers at Amazon, right? So I worked on the first Kindle, and I worked on the precursor to Prime Video before I went back to Prime Video. I worked in payments. So, I think the fact that Amazon does so many different things has allowed me to work on a variety of different things, and didn't feel like I've been on one team. It's not like I worked in the accounting department for 25 years and they handed me a gold watch, right? And so, there's a VP. I think he's still a VP in advertising, Paul Kotis. He told me one day, he said, "I've never switched teams."
Wow.
Right? Like Amazon just kind of, refactored itself around him until he was VP of ads, right? And so great guy. And so, I don't think it's to that extreme, but, I had a wide variety of experiences there. And so it doesn't feel like one 18-year contiguous sort of experience.
So it sounds like you were still challenged, learning. I think when I was at Amazon for my short stint, it was difficult for me to not have wandering eyes because there were these other hot companies, recruiters were messaging me, and I was just seeing that, oh, maybe I can get more somewhere else. Did you ever consider leaving Amazon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially early career, it makes a lot of sense to jump companies. Everybody hears the common advice is like, hey, you want to maximize your total comp, you should be job hopping. I think that works until you get to the equivalent of senior. After that, I think, you're an outlier here, but I think after that, it makes sense to put roots down, right? The levels, at the highest levels, I don't think you're going to find a lot of distinguished engineers or principal engineers or senior staff engineers that haven't been on the team. The jump, the thing that got them to that level, I think what you'll find is that, there was 5 years, at least 3, but more like 5 or so, where they really stayed on the same team on the same problem. Right. And so, I think if you want to min-max it, what I would say is, job hop every 2 years till you get to mid, maybe a little bit before, and then go to, and then try to put roots down if you want to become a high-level tech IC. For me, I think that because I was able to go to different teams and, because I don't have that computer science background, I think staying put made a ton of sense because I feel like there was so much to learn, right? There was so much code that you had access to. There were all of these wikis, these internal videos. And so I felt like I could still grow in the ways that I wanted to by staying at Amazon.
I remember even when I was at Amazon, the stock was climbing like crazy. Did you have any years where you were just super overcompensated? And if so, how much were you making in that year?
So here's the thing. I would, I was basically divesting and then, putting money into other investments. And I won't say that I missed a lot of the Amazon's climb because a lot of it was sort of invested.
Right.
I don't know. I think 2020 or something like that, I probably got an extra $350K that I didn't deserve. Just from the market returns and extra RSUs that were given to me. When I left, so 2024, if on the vesting schedule that I was on, I would have made $750K, which is not a lot compared to the upper end of the salary ranges, but quite a bit just sort of objectively as a number to make in the US at this point in time. I decided around, I think 2018 or 2019 to maybe not divest my Amazon shares because it was always you're dumb, you shouldn't put all of your eggs in one basket. But every time I sold stock, if you just look at the stock price, it was just the wrong move.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to keep every single little bit, but I'm going to keep some. And so that turned out to be okay.
You said extra equity. Does Amazon have for high performers, a discretionary equity or additional equity program?
Not that I know of. I think compensation is largely.
So you're talking about like refreshers then?
Yeah, yeah. It's at the discretion of managers, and so one of my best managers, he was basically like, YOLO.
YOLO.
He was like, I'm out, and so he hooked me up, and let me go. But it's not like these insane like $1 million things that I ever got.
How big of a difference did that?
It was that 350 delta is what I'm talking about.
I see. Oh,
It was just like, that
That's
was
over
nice.
4 years or all
No,
at
it
once?
was just sort of,
All at once. Here's 350. Okay, that's pretty good.
yeah. It was the equivalent of that. He was basically on his way out, and he gave it to me, and then he left, and then that appreciated essentially the next year, like immediately. So
Oh, that's amazing.
it wasn't like he didn't write me a check. It was just a combination of the of sort of getting an outsized performance bonus and the stock price just doing really well.
Okay, so over the course of your career, 18 years at Amazon, one thing that I'm curious is, what was your biggest regret?
Yeah, certain teams, I think, just reading the writing on the wall and making a sober decision about whether to stay or whether to leave. I think there was a lot of inertia, right? I think your default mode is to just stay put for some amount of time. And I don't know if that's useful.
I guess the career regret is noticing when you're in a bad situation or a bad team and just taking the initiative to change that situation, just leave.
The regret is just, did you make it a decision or not? Did you take in all of the considerations and then said, okay, I am going to continue to stay? It's the deferral of a decision, and so the default becomes just staying put. That's the regret. It's just like, just turn it into an explicit decision.
And the last question I like to ask, and I ask everyone this question, is if you could go back to you just graduated college, you're right about to enter the industry, you could tell yourself something, what would be the thing that you want to tell yourself?
I think maybe saying something around people pleasing, right? In the culture that I was raised in, and there are these tracks that you get on, and it's like, okay, well, do well in school, and then go get a job, and then go get married, and you have this feeling of being ahead or behind, right? So that relative comparison. But then also, after you do a thing, after you make some sort of achievement, you're kind of looking to someone else for validation. And I don't know if my younger self would have listened, to be quite honest with you. But just if I could somehow learn this lesson that the person that you really need to please is yourself. Just being are you doing what you want to do? Or are you doing it because that's the expectation of somebody else? Are you climbing the ladder because you want to get to the top, or are you climbing a ladder because the ladder was put in front of you? Just examining that.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Steve. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely.
And I guess now would be the time if you want to shout out anything that you're working on.
I have my YouTube channel. It's called The Life Engineered. So go and subscribe to that. I have a weekly newsletter that gets sent out. So, it takes a long time to make a YouTube video. And so, if you want more from me, the newsletter's there. And then if you want to chat, just join my Discord.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.